Behind me is the French Palace of Versailles. And as we walk through the King's Palace, I'm going to tell you a story about how Benjamin Franklin changed its fate forever to save America. Let's set the scene here. It's 1776, and the Continental Congress has just declared independence from Great Britain, and the French, on the other hand, on the other side of the Atlantic, were still kind of reeling from their defeat in North America. They had lost French Canada to the British, and they're looking at this upstart movement of colonists trying to separate from Great Britain with sympathy, but also with a lot of skepticism. And a couple months after the American Revolution, in the fall of 1776, 70-year-old Benjamin Franklin got on a ship to Europe. Now, in those times, that journey was incredibly dangerous, and just that alone could kill you, especially at 70 years old. But on top of that, the British controlled the seas, and if Benjamin Franklin was intercepted on that journey to Europe, he would have been hanged as a traitor. But the British never found out, and Benjamin Franklin made it to Paris safely without anyone knowing about it and expecting him to arrive. There was rampant speculation when he arrived, because Benjamin Franklin, after all, was the most famous American in the world at this point. He was this scientific genius akin to Galileo or Newton. Everyone knew about his experiments of capturing electricity from lightning, and when he arrived, you couldn't miss the guy, because unlike everyone of the day who wore the powdered wigs, Benjamin Franklin just sported a fur hat and was strutting through Paris with speculation running rampant about what he was doing there. Everything from he was trying to secure a European French education for his sons, he was actually a betrayer of the American cause and fleeing to Europe. But in reality, Benjamin Franklin, like a bunch of other ambassadors for the Continental Congress, was going to a European capital to try and secure support for the newfound republic and the revolution that was undergoing back in America. But the French were highly skeptical of the Americans' ability to actually beat the British. How could this tiny little country with no resources actually prevail? So Franklin had his work cut out for him in Paris. He adopted the French way of doing a lot without looking like you're doing a lot. He worked really hard hours behind the scenes, but would always accept guests into his house and spend hours talking to people that he had no relation to. So Franklin spent a lot of his time here in Versailles spinning American defeats on the battlefield into victories in the larger war. He was taking the time to convince the King of France and all of his aides that the Americans actually had the British exactly where they want them, and all they needed was a little bit of support to turn the tide against the British and win the war and humiliate Britain. And he was doing all of this while playing the long game. He wasn't being very forceful. He wasn't directly confronting the king and saying he needed support right now. He was playing the French courtly game, spending time in the beautiful rooms of Versailles, going to parties, talking to people, charming all the French ladies, as was reported at the time, and biding his time for the perfect moment when he could build up the influence that he had built in the capital and turn it into currency. But the challenge for Franklin was the fact that optically, him being at court, attending parties and salons, and schmoozing with French royalty looked really, really bad. And people, even as prominent as John Adams, were saying that he was betraying the American cause and opulently spending money and time in the French capital while the war raged on and Washington and his army were freezing back over in America. A year into this courtly song and dance, Benjamin Franklin saw a messenger coming straight towards him in Paris. And before the messenger even got off his horse, Franklin asked him, "Has Philadelphia fallen?" And the messenger said, "Yes, but I have good news." The good news was that although Philadelphia had fallen, General Washington had won the Battle of Saratoga, where he captured up to 6,000 British soldiers. And Franklin was left wondering, is this the moment I needed? He had been schmoozing in the French court of Versailles for up to a year now, and he was wondering, would this be enough to convince the French to aid the war effort? And apparently it worked. 3 months later in 1778, the French and the Americans signed the Treaty of Alliance, with the French committing 63 warships, 22,000 sailors, and 12,000 soldiers to the American war effort. The French crown also contributed the equivalent of today's $2.5 billion throughout the American Revolutionary War. And all of this aid actually made a huge difference. At the Siege of Yorktown, the French and Americans teamed up together to beat the British in a major victory that helped end the Revolutionary War in favor of the Americans. I mean, it's such a big deal that here at Versailles, in the Gallery of the Battles, showcasing the biggest French victories all the way up until 1830, an entire painting is dedicated to the Siege of Yorktown. So what did this Franco-American alliance get the French? Well, it made them the oldest ally of the United States, a country that would ascend to being one of the major powers in the world. And secondly, it offered a humiliating defeat to the British, who had bested them previously. It was evidence that two nations are better off working together than going it alone. But it also strained the finances of the French crown pretty severely. As a new nation, America wasn't able to immediately repay its debts. So ironically, this aid that he had given America caused so much strain to the French government that it actually helped precipitate the French Revolution, which ultimately ended in King Louis XVI, the former owner of the Chateau of Versailles, to lose his head. But in the end, unlike for Louis, this partnership between France and the United States was the best thing that ever happened to either country. I mean, on the one hand, you have Benjamin Franklin, who saved America by schmoozing his way through Versailles and playing his cards when he needed to. And on the other hand, you have the French. Because of the alliance with America, you get the French Revolution, which forms the bedrock of French values today. It just goes to show that when it came to Benjamin Franklin, he not only saved America, he not only, yes, bankrupted Versailles, but he also helped nudge France towards a better future, and ultimately showed that working together is much better than going it alone.